The city had 1,000 ways to make a person disappear. A uniform was the cheapest. Wang Sao had learned this a long time ago, long before he needed it to be true. Susan noticed the calluses first, not his face, not the mop, the hands. She was 3 steps above him in the stairwell when she saw them, wide-knuckled, deliberate, wrapped around a cleaning brush with the kind of controlled grip that had nothing to do with scrubbing floors. The hands of a man who had held far heavier things and chosen, for reasons she couldn't name, to hold this instead. She kept walking, but the image stayed with her the way wrong things do, like a picture hung slightly off-center that you can't stop seeing even after you've left the room. Susan Adeyemi was not, by nature, a woman who lingered. She was the person her colleagues called when a crisis needed a spine. 12 years at Crestline Partners had sanded down whatever was soft and left behind something elegant and load-bearing. She did not panic. She did not speculate. She solved. She was also, in the private architecture of herself, someone who noticed things other people edited out. The tremor in Director Holt's hand before quarterly reviews, the way the receptionist always laughed a half-second too late, the new janitor, the quiet one, who worked the morning shift like he was paying a debt to the building personally, methodically, and with the stillness of a man who had made peace with being unseen. She noticed on a Wednesday that he hadn't touched the sandwich he'd set on the floor beside his cart. She noticed on Thursday that there was no sandwich at all. On Friday, she stopped. He didn't look up immediately. When he did, his eyes were the problem, dark and still, and far too composed for someone being interrupted mid-task by a stranger holding a container of jollof rice she'd packed for herself and was now, apparently, offering him instead. "You're going to make yourself sick," she said. It came out more matter-of-fact than kind, which was probably why he didn't argue. He looked at the food, then at her, a long, measuring pause, the kind that had nothing to do with deciding whether to accept the rice. "Thank you," he said finally, quiet, accented, careful in the way that people are careful when they've trained themselves out of saying too much. Susan nodded and went upstairs. She told herself she wouldn't think about it again. She was wrong about that too. What she didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that 3 floors above them, one of Wang So's lieutenants had watched the entire exchange through a security feed and was now making a phone call with slightly unsteady hands. What she didn't know was that the man she'd just fed controlled the underground architecture of the city the way a conductor controls an orchestra, everything moving, nothing visible, and all of it pointing back to him. What she didn't know was that no one had simply handed him something in a very, very long time, and that Wang Sao, kneeling on the 7th floor landing with a container of her rice going warm in his hands, was trying to remember the last time someone had looked at him and seen hunger instead of danger. He couldn't. Susan had a rule about the stairwell. It was hers between 6:45 and 7. 15 minutes of silence before the floor filled with noise and need and people who required things from her. She guarded it the way she guarded very little else. She didn't guard it on Monday. Monday was the day she came up the stairs and found him sitting against the wall on the landing, not working, just still, with the particular stillness of a body that has quietly run out of something. His head wasn't bowed, he wasn't dramatic about it, he simply sat the way people sit when they've stopped pretending they're fine and haven't yet decided what comes next. Susan stood there for a moment longer than was polite. Then she went upstairs, set her bag down at her desk, and opened the container she'd packed that morning, her mother's recipe, the one she made on Sundays in large batches, because cooking small felt like a kind of loneliness. She split it without overthinking it, found a spare container in the break room, filled it, and went back down. He hadn't moved. She held it out. "You'll work better if you eat." Practical, unarguable, the same tone she used to close a meeting that was running too long. He looked at the container, then at her.
And there it was again, that quality in his eyes that she couldn't file away neatly. Not gratitude, exactly, more like recalibration, like she was a variable he hadn't accounted for, and he was quietly rearranging everything around her presence. "I'm fine," he said. "I didn't ask," she said. A beat. The fluorescent light above them did its familiar flicker. Somewhere above, the elevator hummed open and released the sound of expensive shoes and Monday morning confidence into the corridor. He took the container. She sat down on the step across from him, not close, not performatively distant, and opened her own. They ate in silence, which felt less strange than it should have. Susan had spent enough years in rooms full of people saying nothing important that actual silence had become a form of company she respected. She didn't ask his name. He didn't offer it. When she stood to go, she paused. "I come through here every morning. I always pack too much." She said it to the stairwell more than to him. A door left open, not an invitation pressed. She heard him set the empty container on the step before she reached the 8th floor. What she didn't let herself examine, not yet, was why she'd moved so quickly. Why splitting the food had felt less like a decision and more like a correction, the way you straighten something that's hanging wrong without stopping to ask yourself why it bothered you. Upstairs, the morning assembled itself into its usual demands. Susan answered all of them, efficiently, completely, and left the stairwell, as always, out of her explanation.
It became a quiet arrangement, the way certain things do, not agreed upon, simply continued until it had the weight of routine. Tuesday, she brought rice and fried plantain. He was already on the landing when she arrived, working, which she appreciated. She didn't want to feel like she'd created an expectation. She left the container on the step without comment, and he said thank you without looking up, and that was enough for both of them. Wednesday, it rained, the kind that made the city feel smaller, pressing everyone into themselves. She came through the landing, and he was wringing out a mop with the focused economy of someone who'd done physical work long before this job required it. She noticed, again, that his movements had a precision that didn't match the task. She didn't say anything about that. Thursday, he spoke first. "You take the stairs because you don't like the elevator." She stopped. He was crouched at the far wall, back to her, still working. "Observation or guess?" she said. "You were in the elevator on Tuesday. Building audit, everyone had to use it." He paused. "You were the only one watching the numbers the entire ride." Susan considered that. Most people watch the numbers. Most people look at their phones. He glanced back then, briefly. "You watched the numbers like you were timing an exit." She almost smiled. "You're observant for someone people don't look at." He turned fully this time, set down what he was holding, and looked at her with those dark, composed eyes, in a way that made the landing feel suddenly smaller, the ceiling lower, the silence between them load-bearing. "People look at the uniform," he said, "not the same thing." It wasn't bitterness. It was a statement of fact delivered without any particular need for her sympathy, which paradoxically made it land harder than bitterness would have. "No," Susan said after a moment, "it isn't." She sat on her usual step, opened her container. He didn't return to his work immediately, which was new. He stayed where he was, watching her with that measuring quality she'd stopped finding unsettling and started finding, quietly, honest. "What do you see when you look at people, all day, while they walk past?" A long pause. Outside, the rain made its argument against the windows. "Who they're pretending to be, and how hard it costs them." Susan looked at him steadily. "And me?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "You're not pretending," he said finally. "That's why they find you useful and slightly inconvenient at the same time." Susan laughed, a short, real sound that surprised even her. He didn't smile, but something in his face shifted, the faintest recalibration, as if laughter was a sound he'd been away from long enough that hearing it required a moment of adjustment. She filed that away too. Ren had been with the organization for 11 years. He knew how to read a room, a silence, a shift in the boss's posture that most people would miss entirely. He had survived that long precisely because he paid attention to things others dismissed. So when he spotted the woman on the 7th floor landing, the administrator, the one who brought food, who sat across from the boss like they were two ordinary people sharing an ordinary morning, he didn't dismiss it. He noted it carefully, and then he made the mistake of mentioning it to the wrong person. By Friday afternoon, 2 of the younger associates had taken an interest. Not malicious, exactly, more the way bored, untested men take interest in anything that seems like leverage, a thread that, if pulled, might yield something useful. They'd found her name from the building directory, her floor, the approximate hour she moved through the lobby alone each evening. They hadn't done anything yet. Yet was the operative word. Wang So heard about it at 6:12 Saturday morning. He was in the back office of a dry cleaning establishment on Haeyun Street that had not processed a single garment in 4 years, listening to Ren deliver the information in the careful monotone of someone who understood they were reporting their own error. Wang So didn't move while Ren spoke, didn't interrupt, didn't alter his expression in any way that would have been visible to someone who didn't know him well. Ren knew him very well. He kept his eyes on the floor. When the report was finished, the silence lasted long enough to become its own kind of answer. "Their names," Wang So said, finally. Ren gave them. Another silence. Wang So stood and walked to the window. The street below was quiet, the city not yet fully assembled into its daytime self. "She carries food in a blue container. She takes the stairs because she values the 15 minutes they give her. She works harder than anyone on her floor and is thanked for it in the particular way that means they've decided she doesn't need anything else." He turned from the window. "She is not a thread. She is not leverage. She is not a variable in anything we are doing in that building." His voice hadn't risen. It never did. "Anyone who requires a second explanation will not be in a position to need one." Ren nodded once, the way a man nods when he is grateful to still be in the room. "And Ren," Wang So picked up the file he'd been reviewing before the interruption, "if she is made uncomfortable, if she feels followed or watched or anything other than completely unremarkable in her day, I will consider that a personal failure of yours." Ren left quickly. Wang So returned to the file. Outside, the city finished waking up, indifferent and unknowing the way cities always are about the arrangements made inside them.
The alarm started at 11:47 on a Tuesday. Not the full evacuation kind. No strobes, no announcements, nobody moving in organized panic toward the exits. Just a low, persistent tone from the direction of the secure records corridor on the 12th floor, and then the particular silence that follows when a building realizes something is wrong, but hasn't decided what to do about it yet. Susan was at her desk when the tone started. She was on her feet before her colleagues had finished looking up from their screens. The corridor was already crowded with the specific, useless energy of people who wanted to appear decisive without actually doing anything. Director Holt stood in front of the vault access door, a heavy, keypad-operated thing that led to the firm's physical archive, with his phone pressed to his ear and the expression of a man who had never personally solved a problem in his life, but had excellent instincts for delegating blame. The keypad had locked. Full system freeze. The security team was 20 minutes out. Inside the vault, according to Holt's increasingly agitated phone call, was a junior analyst who had gone in to retrieve a document and was now sealed in a room with no ventilation override. 20 minutes. Susan looked at the door, then at the keypad, then, because she had stopped filtering her own observations, she looked down the corridor. Wang So was at the far end with his cart, watching. Not with the detached curiosity of someone witnessing background drama, with the focused, assessing stillness of someone running calculations. Their eyes met. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. He left his cart and walked toward the door with a quietness that parted the small crowd without asking it to move. Holt started to say something. One look from Wang So, brief, absolute, and the sentence died before it formed. He examined the keypad for approximately 4 seconds. Then he did something Susan couldn't fully follow, a sequence, unhurried and precise, fingers moving across the panel with the muscle memory of someone who had done this before in conditions far less forgiving than a corporate corridor in daylight. No tools, no force, just knowledge applied with the efficiency of someone who found the lock's logic and simply disagreed with it. The door released with a clean, pressurized exhale. The analyst stumbled out, breathing hard and grateful. The crowd rearranged itself into relief. Holt began constructing a version of events in which he had managed the situation. Wang So stepped back, picked up a cloth from his belt, wiped down the keypad with the same unhurried calm, as though tidying up after a minor spill. Susan watched him walk back to his cart. She stood very still in the corridor while the noise rebuilt itself around her, thinking about hands that held a mop with a grip trained for heavier things, and a 4-second silence that had known exactly what it was doing.
She almost didn't see it. It was a Thursday, and she was running 12 minutes late, a thing that happened to Susan approximately 4 times a year and bothered her each time with the same precise intensity. She'd taken a different exit, the side door on Meridian, cutting through the narrow service lane that ran along the building's east face to reach the corner cart before it closed. She was thinking about the Holt debrief, about the quarterly report she'd restructured twice because the numbers told an uncomfortable story, and her job was apparently to make uncomfortable stories easier to sit with. She was not thinking about the lane itself, or what might be in it, which was why she nearly walked directly into the rear bumper of the third SUV. There were 4 of them, black, identical, idling in a neat column that blocked the lane completely, not the tentative double parking of a delivery, a formation, deliberate, patient, pointed in the same direction like something that had been arranged rather than parked. She stepped back against the building wall on instinct, and then she saw him. Wang So stood at the head of the column in his work uniform, and yet not. The uniform was the same. Everything else had shifted in a way she couldn't immediately name. He was speaking quietly to a man in a dark suit who was nodding with the focused attention of someone receiving instructions they intended to follow exactly. A second man stood slightly behind, hands clasped, facing outward, scanning the lane in the way that security personnel scan spaces, not casually, but professionally, dividing the environment into sectors. Nobody was looking at Wang So the way people looked at janitors. They were looking at him the way people look at weather, the thing everything else has to account for. He said something short. The suited man moved immediately to the lead vehicle, spoke through the window, and the column came alive, engines lifting from idle to ready in a single quiet breath. Another man she hadn't noticed peeled away from the building's shadow and opened the rear door of the second SUV. Wang So turned. He saw her. The fraction of a second that followed was the most honest exchange they'd had. No container of food between them, no stairwell, no casual architecture of routine to stand inside. Just Susan against the wall and Wang So 10 feet away, and the entire careful arrangement of the last 5 weeks suddenly sitting in the open air between them. He didn't look away, didn't reach for an explanation. He simply looked at her, that same measuring stillness, but this time with something underneath it she hadn't seen before. Not guilt, something older than guilt, something that looked, very briefly, like being tired of a particular kind of performance. Then he got into the car. The column moved out of the lane with quiet, unhurried precision.
Susan stayed against the wall for a long moment, the corner cart long closed, the debrief entirely forgotten.
She didn't come to the landing on Friday. Or Monday. Wang So noticed without permitting himself to examine what noticing meant. He worked the corridor, he kept his schedule, he did not look toward the stairwell door with any frequency that could be described as waiting. On Wednesday, she came back. No container. She simply sat on her usual step with her tea going cold in her hands and the particular quiet of someone who has spent several days having an argument with themselves and hasn't entirely declared a winner. He continued working. He didn't ask. After a while, she said, "My mother used to say that the loneliest people are the ones who've learned to need very little, because nobody thinks to check on them." He didn't respond immediately, set down what he was holding. "She was talking about herself?" he asked. She was talking about herself. Susan turned the cup slowly in her hands. "She was the most self-sufficient person I've ever known. Raised me alone, never asked anyone for anything, always the one other people leaned on." A pause. "I used to think it was strength. I was an adult before I understood it was also a kind of loneliness she'd just made peace with." The landing held the silence the way it always did, generously, without pressing. "She's gone?" he asked. 4 years. She said it cleanly, the way you say things you've learned to carry without putting them down. "Yours?" The question landed differently than she intended. She felt it the moment it left her. Too direct, perhaps, for whatever arrangement this was. She started to qualify it. "Also gone," he said. Something in his voice had changed register. Not softer exactly, more like a door opened onto a room that was kept very dark, not from secrecy, but from a kind of careful preservation. She waited. "She made jangjiram on Sunday mornings, braised beef, very slow. The whole apartment smelled like soy and garlic by the time I woke up." He paused. "She used to say that good food was the only honest thing, that you couldn't fake the time it took." Susan looked at him. She thought about the containers she'd brought, the rice packed on Sunday evenings in her mother's recipe, in large batches, because cooking small felt like a kind of loneliness. She wondered if he had made that connection before she had. "I think they would have understood each other," she said. Wang So looked at her then, fully, without the measuring quality, without the careful calibration she'd come to recognize as his default distance from the world. What was there instead was something unguarded and briefly enormous, the expression of a man who had not been seen clearly in so long that being seen had become its own kind of vertigo. It lasted only a moment. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual stillness. But Susan had seen it, and he knew that she had.
She found it by accident, the way the worst things usually arrive. It was a Friday evening, the floor emptied out, Susan staying late to finalize a compliance report that needed to be clean before the weekend. She'd requisitioned files from the archive, the physical ones, the kind that predated the firm's digital migration, and the junior clerk, new and slightly overwhelmed, had brought up the wrong box. She'd opened it before she realized. Inside, alongside documents that had no business being in a corporate compliance archive, was a folder, unmarked on the outside. Inside, a single printed profile, the kind assembled from multiple sources, surveillance photographs paper-clipped to typed summaries, names in both English and Korean running down the margin in a column that read like a ledger of consequences. At the top, a photograph, not in uniform, not on a stairwell landing, a different setting entirely, the sharp clarity of a long lens camera, a man emerging from a building she didn't recognize, surrounded by the same careful arrangement of suited figures she had seen in the service lane on Meridian Street. The same jaw, the same hands, the same absolute quality of ownership over whatever space he occupied.
The name printed beneath it was not the name on his building ID. She read the file the way you read something you already understand but need the words to confirm. Slowly, completely. The organization's reach mapped across 3 pages in dry, precise language that made it more frightening, not less. The number of people who reported to him, the industries that moved because he decided they should, the 2 individuals, described only by initials, who had made the error of direct opposition and were referenced only in past tense. The city's most feared criminal, the file said, in the particular bureaucratic tone of someone who had run out of more clinical language. Susan sat with it for a long time. She thought about a man who opened locked doors in 4 seconds, who commanded a column of black cars with a sentence, who had subordinates with the careful eyes of people who understood that mistakes had permanent consequences. She thought about Jangjarim, about a mother who braised beef slowly on Sunday mornings, about an expression that had crossed his face for one unguarded moment on a stairwell landing and looked nothing at all like the thing described in this file. She closed the folder. She sat in the empty office while the city did its indifferent Friday evening outside the windows, all light and noise and people moving through their lives without any idea of the arrangements operating underneath them. Then she did the thing she always did when something was broken and she didn't yet know how to fix it. She finished her work, methodically, completely. She returned the wrong box to the archive with a note about the misfiling. She took the stairs down. She did not stop on the 7th floor landing.
She avoided the stairwell for 6 days. She took the elevator, standing at the back with her eyes on the numbers the way she always did, except now she wasn't timing an exit. She was just getting from one floor to another like everyone else, which felt like a small defeat she refused to name. On the 7th day, it rained. She was at the corner on Meridian, bag pulled close, waiting for a break in it that wasn't coming, when she heard him say her name. Not her title, not the impersonal acknowledgement of the landing, her name, in that quiet, careful voice behind her. She turned around because not turning would have required more composure than she had left. He was in the uniform still. Rain had darkened the shoulders of it. He looked exactly like what he wasn't, which was the entire problem. "You found something," he said. Not a question. "I found everything," she said. The rain made the street loud and small at the same time. Around them, the city moved in its waterproofed, indifferent way, nobody looking, nobody interested in 2 people standing outside a building, having a conversation that was quietly enormous. "Susan, don't," she said it without heat. That was the thing about real anger, the deep, structural kind. It didn't need volume. "Don't explain it yet. I need you to understand what you took from me first." He was still, the way he was always still, but this time it cost him something. "I had a routine," she said, "a landing and 15 minutes and something that felt, for the first time in a long while, like it might become something honest. I brought you food because you looked hungry, and because my mother raised me to believe that seeing a person was the least you could do." She stopped. "Was any of it real? The mother, the Jangjarim, the way you looked at me on Wednesday when you thought I couldn't see what it meant?" "All of it," he said, immediate, no architecture of qualification around it. "Every word." "Then it's worse," she said quietly, "because you let me build something true inside something false, and that's not a kindness. That's a particular kind of damage dressed up as one." He didn't argue. She understood in that moment that he wouldn't, that he had enough honest reckoning in him to receive what was accurate without deflecting it, which somehow made it harder. "I chose this life because it was mine, unremarkable and completely mine. I am not a person who belongs in a file. I am not someone's sanctuary or someone's exception or the one soft thing a dangerous man keeps in a locked room of himself." Her voice stayed level. "Go away, CO." He stood in the rain and looked at her with that unguarded expression, the one she'd only seen once before, now entirely uncontained. She walked away before it could change her mind. He didn't come the next day, or the one after. Susan told herself this was the correct outcome.
She had drawn a line in the rain on Meridian Street with both hands and whatever steadiness she had left, and he had respected it, and that was what a clean ending looked like. She returned to her routine. Stairs, tea, the window on the landing where the morning light pressed itself flat and the city arranged itself below into something almost beautiful. She stood there alone and told herself she preferred it. She was unconvincing. On the 9th night, she was in her kitchen, Sunday, making rice in the large batch because cooking small still felt like a particular loneliness, when someone knocked on her door. Not the building's intercom, the door itself, which meant someone had come up without buzzing, which meant the front entrance had been left open again by the third-floor neighbors, which was a complaint she'd filed twice and would apparently need to file a third time. She opened the door with that specific irritation already assembled on her face. Wang Sao stood in the hallway. No suit, no uniform. Dark trousers, a plain gray shirt, the kind of clothes that belonged to nobody in particular. No coat, despite the November cold she could feel coming through the stairwell behind him. Nothing in his hands. No phone, no file, no architecture of purpose or authority around him. He looked, without all of it, younger than she'd understood him to be, and exhausted in the way that people are exhausted when they've been performing a version of themselves for so long that stopping feels like a structural failure. She didn't say anything. "I'm not here as what I am," he said. "I don't know how to explain the distance between those two things, except to tell you that the man in that file has never once, in 11 years, sat on a stairwell landing and talked about his mother." He paused. "I didn't plan what happened between us. I want you to know that. I planned everything else, not that." The hallway light was doing its own flickering. Susan thought distantly that this building had the same electrical issues as the 7th-floor landing, and found, absurdly, that this almost made her want to smile. "I'm not asking you to accept what I am," he said. "I'm asking if the person you met on that landing, the one who ate your food and told you the truth about things I haven't said aloud in years, if that person is worth one more conversation." He met her eyes. "Just me. No coat, no cars, no file. Just me asking." The rice on her stove was going to need attention in approximately 4 minutes. Susan looked at him for a long moment, this man the city feared, standing in her hallway without his armor, asking to be seen the way she had always seen him. She stepped back from the door. 4 minutes, she said. "Then you stir the rice."
He stirred the rice. Not perfectly. He held the spoon with that same controlled grip she'd noticed on the landing, the one trained for heavier things, and she had to show him twice to keep it moving from the bottom. He listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that instructions given once were a courtesy not to be wasted. They ate at her small table by the window. No explanation of what came next, no negotiation of the impossible distance between his world and hers. Just two people who had found each other in a stairwell, eating slowly, the city doing its indifferent Sunday evening outside the glass, all light and movement and lives running parallel to lives, most of them never touching. Susan thought about what her mother used to say, that good food was the only honest thing, that you couldn't fake the time it took. She thought Wang Sao's mother had understood something similar in a kitchen that smelled of soy and garlic on Sunday mornings, feeding a boy who would grow into something the world found frightening and who had never, in all the years between, found anywhere that felt like that kitchen again. Until a landing on the 7th floor, until a blue container held out without ceremony by a woman who simply noticed that he was hungry. The most feared man in the city washed his own bowl when they were finished, set it on the drying rack with the same unhurried precision he applied to everything. Then he stood at her kitchen window and looked at the city below, his city, in every sense that mattered and several that didn't, with the expression of someone seeing a familiar thing from an angle they had never been given before. Susan watched him from the table. She was not naive about what tomorrow held. The file existed, his world existed. The distance between a corporate stairwell and the underground architecture of a city did not close itself because two people had eaten rice together and told each other the truth about their mothers. But her mother had also taught her that the bravest thing was not the dramatic gesture, it was the small, repeated choice to see a person clearly and not look away. She had made that choice on a landing with a warm container in her hands. She supposed she was still making it. Wang Sao turned from the window. Something in his face was quiet and settled in a way the file would never have predicted and perhaps could never have measured. "Same time tomorrow," he said. Susan considered him, this impossible, complicated, entirely real man in her kitchen. "I always pack too much," she said. And that, for now, is where we leave them. If this story found you, moved you, or made you want to know what comes next, you already know what to do. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Susan and Wang Sao's story is only just beginning, and something tells me the landing was just the first page. See you in the next one.